I get to introduce Dave Madden. He's been working since the age of 6. He actually had a paper route that he helped his brother with. And then at the age of 11, his brother bought a lathe, and he was taught himself how to turn. And I thought, that's pretty unique in itself. Dave moved to Phoenix in 1981, where he joined local woodworking group. And since then, he has joined the AAW, which he's a very busy instrumental person. He'll never tell you how busy he is, but he's always busy. So today he's going to demonstrate the center turning, off-center turning, which I can tell you I have not tried very much of, so I'm really can't wait to see how it turns out. So everyone, I'm introducing Dave. Let's give Dave a hand.
Well, welcome everybody. I got to correct one thing there when he said I taught myself how to turn. I never have learned how to turn. I just started turning and had a good time at it and continued. I understand that I didn't realize this when I was asked to take this topic. I did not understand that you had a couple of examples or demonstrations already. So I changed the tone of this a little bit, or quite a bit actually. I'm probably not going to do any turning. I will do it if somebody twists my arm, I guess. I did bring some tools. But I want to explain what I have put together and explain what this is for me today and what it is not. So, is not, I'm not going to take something and show it like you're supposed to, where we have an off-center groove in a platter and a dish, and somebody can probably guess what this is. If I give some ideas today that you can use, that each one of you can use in your own turning and your own processes, that's mainly what I want to achieve. And one thing I need to point out with off-center turning, it creates its own additional safety issues. So you need to be very alert, very aware that when you're just doing your normal thing with off-center or multi-axis turning, you are creating extra problems. Possible pinch points, numerous different things that can happen because of your effort to make this off-center device. You guys have all had lots of safety lessons in the last several years, both from Zimmerman or his position, and from the classes that you've taken at Yavapai. And when a mentor comes over, I am absolutely 100% positive that you get some more safety issues. And all of that is excellent, and you need to step it up a notch when you start doing off-center turning. Your typical instruction, we need to make sure that the banjo is locked. We need to make sure that the tool rest is locked. We need to make sure that if you're using the tailstock that we've got it locked. We talk about all of those things, but with off-center turning, we're going to add something to that list because a couple of extra things enter in. Does everyone know what ghosting is? Is there anyone who does not understand ghosting? When you do off-center turning, you create your own ghosting, just like when we put a square object on with the intent to turn it round, you get ghosting. If you look at this, you see very easily can tell that you've got a square object. And as you turn that on, the square object kind of disappears, and you get all kinds of different things that you start to see. And the slower it goes, you can still see that that's not a big round object, but it's something in between. So that's the ghosting that we talk about with off-center turning, and you need to be very careful about that, because when you set your tool up and you set your tool rest, you set the tool to that accordingly, But when you turn away a little bit, you've got a great big gap. So as you turn and as that changes, it affects how you handle your tool. So if you're using, right now, if you're using a spindle roughing gouge, taking this off, I suggest that you always lay the tool on the tool rest, roll this by hand, and get an idea of that gap so that you've got a starting point. And then as you turn this on, you know that you're going to just barely come over the edge of the tool rest with the cutting tool. Or if you are moving your tool rest further back just to be on the safe side, then you know that you've got about a ½ inch before you start seeing wood. So get used to kind of looking at your tool at the tool rest to judge where you're going to start cutting, so that you don't get the tool jammed in there and get your catch and knock the wood off the lathe. And now we're going to turn it around, and I'm going to kind of copy Susan Murphy's method and of getting this turned around. She demonstrated this when they did wig stands. So I'm going to copy that. She gets full credit for this. She magically turns around and comes back with this and says, voila, done. So that's what we're going to do today. And one of the first things I suggest you do once you get it round is draw a reference line. Can you see that line on the screen? Okay, set your tool rest, and with the lathe shut off, obviously, you move the tool rest up and draw a line, straight line with the tool rest, move your tool rest, finish the line, make sure it's good and straight. Then you can take it off of the lathe, and on the end of it, draw a straight line from that reference line. You draw another reference line through the center. Then you turn the thing end to end and do the same thing on the other end. And those 2 or 3 reference lines then keep you organized when you're going through the rest of your process. You've got the reference line on there, and we've got it nice and smooth. Now I want to do something off center, so I'm going to make a line, and I'm going to move I'm going to make a line on both ends, and we're going to come the same direction. I'm going to make my new line toward me, and I just picked 1/4 inch here, and I'm going to do 1/4 inch here. Okay, now we've created another center. Then this would be a parallel axis to the original one. So now, as this turns, you can see that I've created a new pinch point between the tool rest and the wood. And that's part of the reasoning that whenever I use, my lathe's got a wheel out here as opposed to the little hand grip, but you should always rotate it first and then decide where you want the tool rest, and then go through the lockdown procedure. Is this locked? Is this locked? Is this locked? And that's the added safety thing that you need to put into off-center turning. Always check it as soon as you've moved anything. Get your tool rest out of the way and check it. Got the clearance set up properly, then tighten it up and go ahead and go to work. This is an example of an off-center that I created for a wig stand, and it is demonstrating, and I'm not going to be able to show it, but it is demonstrating that you start out on center, and I've turned one spool of thread on center, and then another spool at the top on center, and then everything else in between is turned off center on some kind of an axis, and each one of these axes is different. So this one was because I set both ends 1/4 inch off one direction, and then this one is probably 1/8 inch off of this one. this is all a parallel axis to the center axis, but they're all different. The four in the middle are all different. So you need to, as you move on this reference line or another line that you've drawn 90 degrees to that, so that you're always moving both ends the same amount. So you can move it up. So lots of options with that. It's kind of fun. Some things that you can do with using multi-center, and I suggest this. I suggest that you get a hold of some just crummy wood, firewood. You have to fight Dan for that, but get a hold of some firewood and just turn some shapes to see what happens. This particular one has a center axis which formed the bottom and the top. Now again, this is just a scrap piece of wood that I grab to do a prototype because I want to make something and I don't know quite how to do it. Don't know quite what I want it to look like. So this has one axis, the center axis, so it was a round cylinder, and then I offset it again parallel. I moved the work toward me and then cut part of it and then move it away from me and cut part of it, and I get this goofy zigzag I was trying to create for a table, a spindle to a table. I made these things about 32 inches long and just did this zigzag all the way up. And for some reason it was popular, but this is where it started. And I suggest if you get any crazy idea you want to try, just take some, if you've got some scraps of birch this big, that works really well. If you don't, I use a lot of pine, and I glue pine together if I have to, whatever I have to do to get the size that I want. I'll be referencing on some other objects that we do, I'll be referencing the size of the chuck. And I'm calling this just a standard 3.5 or 4 inch chuck. This is a Vic mark. You can use Nova one way, many of the knockoff. So basically this size chuck is pretty much what I've used this afternoon for all the different things that I'm going to show. It depends on how far the jaws will open and what the size is when the jaws are closed. But almost everything I'm going to do will either use a tenon on the end, which you're all used to, or more likely a recess where you expand into it. Right now I'm expanded into a recess. This has been turned round, this has been turned round, but you can see that it's obviously not round. We'll slow it down so you can see it a little bit. But this is what I refer to, or some of the pros do. They call it a club foot. So basically anything artistic that you decide you want to try, I suggest you get a piece of scrap wood and give it a whirl. There was a recent demonstration in Raleigh many people do this. So if you take in the recess of the wood, if you can see right here, if you just tip that out a little bit and then lock it in place with your chuck wrench, and make sure that you're getting a little bit of bite on top and you're pushing it in on the bottom, so you got lots of bite on the bottom, then you get the wobble that you make when you start cutting on that piece of wood. I don't like to do that. I do use that process for some other things that I'll show very quickly here. If you're probably all making boxes, or you have, and this is a simple plain lid off of a box, and I have mounted that on the chuck and done the same thing. Just tip it out, tighten the chuck, and then when you turn from over here with a sharp tool or the end of your skew or whatever you've got, then you get these moon-shaped half moons, fingernail moon, or you can turn it almost all the way around, and you can make a lot of different embellishments on the top of your simple plain lid for a box. How many of you have tried the twisted axes for a goblet or a dish, or a glass? This is a method that I use. I know there's some people do everything on the lathe and make all their markings from on the lathe. I like to take the cylinder from this point where you've got it pretty accurately rounded. I like to take it from this point. I get my handy dandy pencil out. So I'm going to draw that reference line. Tool rest right against the wood, draw that reference line, and then I'm going to draw a line through that center point on each end. And I would do that ordinarily with a ruler, but I'm going to eyeball it today. Now this is the point where some people like to do it on the lathe. I like to take it off of the lathe because I like using compass. So you want to keep this outside wall of the goblet, you want to keep this thick because you can always come back and take some wood out and make your goblet a little bit bigger and make your wall thickness a little bit thinner. But if you get this too far out, say I want an 1/8 inch wall thickness, your twist, your rib from the twist is going to take up some of the space, and then you find out your wall thickness is down about 1/16 of an inch. So start with it too small. You can always come out a little bit bigger. And what you're going to make is a twisted goblet. Does that show on the screen? And you can see that you've got a triangle on top formed from the twist, and then the bottom half is all turned on center. So I like to keep this fairly thick on the outside, so I would make a mark there, then I would take my compass and set it to that mark, and then draw a circle on the bottom, keep the compass size, and put that matching circle on the other end. My simple method is to start on my registration line, my reference line, and I'm going to make a point at the intersection of the straight line and my circle. And I'm going to call that point number 1. And I'm going to number it kind of down toward the center as opposed to right next to the point. But I do want to make a point there. So I'm going to poke a little bit of a hole in it. And then I'm going to follow that reference line down to where it meets the circle again. And I'm going to make another point. And now I'm going to go from each one of those points, and now I'm going to take the compass and make a mark and a mark, both sides off of the bottom reference point and both ways off the top reference point. Now if you look at that, if you call this number 1, we're going to go clockwise around the circle. This will be number 2, and I'll make an indentation there also, and we'll come across to here and make another indentation. When you do the circle and then you make these extra marks, both top and bottom, then you've created a 6-sided box. If you wanted to put a pin mark on each one of those, we only want 3, so we're going to go 1, 2, and I'm going to make this one 3. And you want to make that mark again away from the edge. And the reason is because when you start moving around to each one of these little pinpoints, you're going to make a mark, and you're going to cut to that circle, and you may end up cutting out your numbers. And you always need to keep this clockwise 1, 2, 3. And then when you flip it upside down, you follow that reference line. This was number 1, and you follow that reference line down. And this is going to be either 2 or 3, any number other than 1. So let's call this one 2. And then you're going to go counterclockwise. You're still going to put 3 down here, and you do the same thing. Give these the compass marks. So this one then becomes 3, and the last one down here becomes 1, counterclockwise. clockwise on one end. 1, 2, 3. Counterclockwise. First offset at one number, counterclockwise on the other end, and you're done. You're ready to start turning. If you want to make a twisted box, put a cylinder similar to this on the lathe, and however big you want to make it, and then part it for your lid and get everything prepared to make your lid, and do all of that and actually finish your box and finish the lid, but leave a real robust thickness of the wall thickness of your box. And then you can fasten the top back to the box, put it together, and you can actually glue inside with hot melt glue and glue it together, let the glue sit up, and then go ahead and turn your entire twisted box. And you'll be able to line up the twists, and hopefully before you put it together, you line up the grain. So you'll have one that's got a good grain configuration, and you'll have one with a good twist configuration. You can get some very subtle changes to something that you're already doing that adds a little bit of a special twist to your work. And another example of that is this is a box lid, and it just has a simple handle on the top to lift it off, but it's done with two separate parallel axes, so that I turned here and then turned here, and you just get a very subtle, simple, but a little bit different look to your box. Another example of subtle is turn something crazy and then put a subtle groove or a subtle mark of some sort on your turning, just to set it off from playing. And that's very easy to do with a couple of different ways that I'm going to show, where you just make something, turn this, move it slightly over, and turn this little groove. And the challenge is to keep your fingers out of the square corners. You want to understand your experience level. If you start to do something, see something on YouTube and want to try it, think about it and think about your experience level. Does it really match up? Do you really want to try it? Think about your lathe, think about your equipment. Zim brings up a good thing. When you start any of your off-center work, if this is turning around and you turn your tray, that's nice and easy. As soon as you move that off-center, then all of a sudden it's wobbling, and you can look at this and see that when you do the off-center groove, then you've got one side that's got a lot more weight on it, and you've got another side that you've turned all the weight away. So this thing is going to wobble on the lathe, and when it wobbles, you've got to consider what kind of speed you want to use for that. So it's just like when you first time you put a log on the lathe, you have no idea how the balance on that is going to be. So you want to turn the lathe speed down to nothing, or as low as you can get it, and start the thing moving. And you're not going to do that until you've turned it by hand a couple of times to make sure you've got clearance everywhere. Once you've established you've got clearance, you check this and then bring it up slowly. And you can bring it up to the point of your comfort level, or you can bring it up to the point where the lathe starts to vibrate. As soon as you feel the vibration, try speeding it up a little bit or slowing it down. And with off-center turning, I would suggest that you slow it down. One of the main things that I'd like for each of you to take away is some way to use something you've learned today on something you're already doing. Just make a subtle mark on it with an off-center mounting or something to that effect until you get comfortable with it. Some people call this off-center turning. Some call it off-axis turning. Some call it multi-center turning. Let's try to define that. The one that throws me is eccentric turning and eccentric axis. There's also another one that's basically infinite axis. So you can make the axis go wherever you want. But, so the axis of the lathe is this point to this point, and it only has one axis. You change the axis by moving your object, by moving your wood. So the wood can have as many axes as you want. And that spool was spool thing was an example. It would have as many as you want to change and as long as you want to make it, simply by keeping the axes parallel and moving it whatever direction and whatever angle you choose. If you start moving one this way and one this way, then you get that twisted axis, or you get a multiple axis on that piece of wood that are not parallel. What I'd like to do is show a couple of different ways that you can mount a piece of wood or do off-axis bowl turning and methods of mounting that. There have been many attempts to make off-axis contraptions, jigs, and this is one that I made back in the 70s, I think. I made a plate and threaded it for a 1'8" because that was a lathe I had at the time. So I could screw a chuck. We didn't have chucks then, but I could screw another faceplate on here and mount it on the lathe, and it would give me a wobble. And then I could set the different amounts of wobble by which off-center hole I chose to screw this into. That was one of my early methods, and I was very happy to abandon that because I never did feel safe with it. And then I made another one where this would fit in a chuck and slide back and forth, and then I could screw a regular chuck out here, and I was using a regular chuck like this, and I think you can imagine how scary that was. And I abandoned that and went to this smaller chuck, which I used, but I didn't really care for it. Roger just brought in a chuck that he made. Again, he starts with a faceplate. He put a wooden plate on here, and then he'd use a glue block and screw to his block of wood that he was going to make into a bowl, and then he would get the amount of offset by rotating this and tighten this down. And I tried a couple of similar ones. There's another one where you actually cut a circle out of this and then make another circle that fits in it, and the inside one rotates and the outside one is mounted solid to the faceplate. All kinds of different examples, ideas, homemade jigs and so on the web, and all I say is be careful, be aware, and think. This is another crazy contraption, and I made this out of deck material and threaded it so it goes on the lathe on the spindle, and I have some threaded to 1'8" and some threaded to 1¼ inch. And then this is an adjustable axis. So there's just a ball in here inside of this nut that rotates, and you can screw things in here that you can then set slightly off center, and again we'll go slow, we'll start real slow and bring it up to speed. So you can do, like if you're into jewelry making pendants, whatever, because when you've got if you mount a flat plate out here on the end of this, if you imagine just a bolt with a head on it, the head's flat. If you put something flat on that and rotate this and just cut it at, it will cut those half moons, the intermittent little slot, little groove. You can make some decorative things. You can make some pendants, some earrings, that kind of thing. I don't suggest this, but I was doing that with one just like this. You can also use that same concept, but then you can put a faceplate on that ball and rotate that wherever you want it, and you can get some crazy stuff off of that if you're interested. There is a company that makes a device that you screw a piece on the headstock, then another piece screws onto that, and then there's several pieces that you can screw onto that. So you can screw a disc into that disc and use double sticky tape or hot melt or whatever, stick a piece of wood on there, and then you can so you just hot melt a piece on there. Works real good for getting rid of your exotic scraps. Lots of methods of just getting rid of your scraps. Okay, I'm going to show a method now to mount a piece of wood, a bowl blank, on a lathe so that you can do off-center work. We're going to start. You'll need a similar chuck, like I mentioned earlier, some kind of a 3.5, 4-inch chuck, and the things that matter are the total diameter when you open this. What is the biggest recess you can get this into? So you're going to measure across here, and I think this one's about 3.5, and then you want to lighten that just a little bit and shoot for something just a little bit smaller. What you need to know here is outside diameter and then the thickness of your jaw, the thickness of this right here. And then you're going to turn a recess in the wood so that this fits in that recess and expands into the bowl, into the wood. Then you're going to close this and measure it. Same thing, you're going to measure the distance across the outside, and you're going to make that a little bit bigger, and that's the number you're going to use to cut another recess in the bottom of the bowl. So you've got two recesses that are overlapping. And that just gives an example of what you're going to make on the bottom of a bowl blank. You're going to mount a bowl blank using the same process where you use a screw chuck. You're going to drill a hole in the center, and you've got this reference line again that I always draw through the center before you drill your hole. You center punch it, get a straight line through that, and then drill a second hole, whatever offset you want, and I've used 1 inch. And then I just put an imaginary circle in there in case you want to do something like I did here, where I went back after the fact and put in a center recess. You don't need that circle if you don't intend to put the center recess in it. So you mount this centered on the screw chuck and turn the bottom, which is the example that I passed around. You'll turn the outer circle recess, leaving as much wood as you can on the inside. And then you take it off the lathe, off the screw, and put it back on the off-center screw. And you do the same thing with the smaller diameter that we just talked about and measured. And the smaller diameter then And this is kind of an exaggeration. This is a bigger example of the same thing. So you have the big circle, and then you have a small circle. And the key is, when you do the small circle, the outer portion of that small circle must coincide with the outer circle of the bigger one. So you end up with this big circle and a small circle forming that moon in the middle. And this one obviously was done with a different chuck. It's a bigger outer circle. So depending on how big your device is that you're trying to make will depend on the amount of your offset and the amount of your method of putting in that moon part. This method that's being passed around right now, both where I just showed the method of making the bottom and then a bowl that was done that way, that method, it's probably the easiest way to learn to make a bowl off center. Drawback is, when you get done, flip it over and look at the bottom, you have an ugly bottom. Sometimes I think the one that's coming around, if it's a fairly flat top, you can still cold chuck it and do something with that recessed moon. If you tilt the top a little bit, which I like to do, so you get a round bowl with kind of a saucer type top, flying saucer type top. And then same thing, I went back and put in some of these grooves after the fact. Went back onto regular center and put the little half moons at the top. So I like the subtle change, and a lot of people won't really know a lot about the off-center turning. But when you add those little marks, they realize that you didn't do that like a regular bowl. Now this one has a regular base, my typical recessed regular base, and then I'll show you how to make the thing to make that. You're going to start with something 3/4 of an inch, 5/8 thick. This is 2 pieces of 3/8 Baltic birch plywood, and if anybody wants to attempt this, I have plenty of this and could share some. You start with drilling a hole in the center. You start with marking it and putting in a reference line, and then you drill a hole in the center, mark 1 inch off, and drill another hole, and this becomes your drill guide, and it will then become you'll turn it over and make part of it into a template. So you need this, so that's what we're going to start off by making. And in order to use this method, you need to wander over to Home Depot. I stopped at Ace, and they don't have it, but there might be another hardware store that would have it. But you need a dowel pin kit. Doweling kit, it's called here, but it's dowel pins. It includes the proper size bit, wooden pins, and you'll need this. You'll need to buy that kit or have access to that drill bit and those pins. If you've already got it, that's good. We're going to start on this method. You'll need a hot melt glue gun. Start with a piece of 3/4 inch MDF, about 8-9 inches in diameter, and you need a faceplate. So you're going to screw a faceplate onto this in the center or as close as you can get it, mount it up, and then turn it, true it up, so you've got a balanced, and I'm going to use a term for this. I'm going to call this a faceplate. you've got a MDF faceplate that will screw onto your lathe, and you've got one hole in the center that you've made by, in a Jacob's chuck, put that bit that's in that kit and drill this hole. And just go in about 5/8 of an inch. Try not to go all the way through. Doesn't really matter if you do, but it might cause some issues. This faceplate is all marked up because I put the reference line on as usual, and then I create all kinds of lines off of that for various, if I want to rotate and do a different kind of, like to put 2 or 3 recessed bowls in a piece of wood. So this is not necessary, but you do need that reference line. Now you're going to take your plate and this piece of 3/4 inch material and mount the center pin here in the center pin there. And now this becomes a drilling guide on your piece of MDF. And you can just hand drill. You line up your reference lines up here, and then you hand drill through your drilling guide to put the second hole in your faceplate. So now that you have the second hole in your faceplate, then you can take a bowl blank, mount it the same way in your lathe, 2 holes, screw chuck, and actually in what I've done here, I only use 1 hole. I centered it, I cut a recess, and then turned a shape, and then I turned that drilling rig that went on with smooth side, I turned that around and I cut it. Then this now can actually be turned on the lathe if I get that dowel pin protruding, and in the offset hole and the center hole. So now I have a centered piece of wood, and it's all turned on this faceplate. I have hot melt glued this to the faceplate, and I turned this shape to fit in the bottom of this. So I've turned a circle here that fits this recess. I've turned this circle to fit the inside one, and that needs to fit tight. And you can come up and look at that and see that it's pretty tight. When you put this plate on, before you turn it, hot melt it to the faceplate. And what I do when I do a hot melt, I usually just do 3 little blobs, and those are still on here. And that will just hold things kind of in place. I put the tailstock up, put pressure on it, and while I've got this pressure on, I then put a hot melt glue. Well, I've already put the hot melt glue around this, so this is already glued on. And then now I go back and I glue this. Once I get this to fit, I go back and glue this to the bottom of the bowl. And what I do, instead of putting the blobs on, or I do in addition to that, I use the hot melt gun like a glue gun, like a caulking gun, and I just put a bead all the way around, with the exception of a little tiny gap of about 1/2 of an inch. And what that does, if to get all these blobs off, you work on each one of them at a time, and you can do that, that's fine. I've found that by doing the little caulking thing, I can squirt it right at the end and get it started, and then I use a little spray, and I just spray ahead all the way around, and it just peels right off. Use whatever you need or want, but put it on with hot melt glue, put the plate on to the faceplate, and then put the bowl onto this. And then you can turn your shape. If you've got this in the center, on the center hole, then you can reshape it if you want to, or you can go take this back off, rotate it so the offset hole is in the center, and so that the center hole is in the offset on the faceplate. And again, you'll get that by lining up your reference lines on both. And now this is attached, and now you have your wobbly bowl blank. When you're all done, peel off the last little thingy, and you can actually, you've already finished the bottom when you had it on the lathe with the screw chuck. You've already finished all the bottom. You've turned the recess. If you're going to do any embellishment, you can put it all in there, and then you turn the bottom right up to the lip. Then when you turn it around, you can shape the top and shape your bowl. And the bowl takes out your 2 screw holes that are in here. When you do this, when you get it all mounted and ready to do the off-center, make sure that you draw exactly what you want to do on the wood. If you just get out the old bowl gouge and head out down the road, I can almost assure you you'll be sorry for it, because you don't realize where this thin edge is, and you will get the bowl centered out here somewhere. So you'll actually cut through your edge of your bowl. I'm going to send another thing around here, and it is a little scrap of maple that I had, and I made a little insert to put into that recess. So I turned a 2-inch pin on the end of this piece of pine and made it fit good and tight in the bowl. And all the bowl has on the bottom is a 2-inch recess. It's probably 3/16 or 1/8 of an inch deep, and it has this piece of wood, a waste block, glued in with hot melt glue, and it is glued in blindly. In other words, I put a little circle dab of glue on the bowl, press this in and give it a little bit of a twist, and put some weight on it. And I just put this on the workbench and set a chuck on top of it till the glue set up. This will hold while you turn a piece of waste, but I just wanted to do this to show that you can do hot melt glue that way. Now, when you're ready to take it off, throw it in the microwave, but put it in the microwave and give it like 3 or 4 seconds, 5 seconds. If it doesn't move, throw it back in, and just be as stubborn as it is. Throw it in for another 5 or 10 seconds, and you'll pull it out and just twist it right off. You got a mess on the bottom. You got a mess on your throwaway plug, but it comes right out, and the mess cleans up very easily. Wait till the microwave temperature gets down a little bit on it, but you can wipe that right off. And I've done experiments with the glue in several different situations like this, but it holds it has for me held very, very, very well, and is very easy to get off. I'm going to go next to this thing that became named, and I don't know who named it or why or when, but it became called a Duck's Chuck for Jim Duxbury and it is an off-center method, an off-center chuck. And I'll go through here what it takes to make one, if anybody's interested in making one. And I have found lots of uses for it, not just this. You start with a piece of soft wood. I use pine, I use poplar. Needs to be an inch thick, needs to be about 3.5 to 4 inches wide, needs to be 7-8 inches long. And I don't know if you've noticed, but as you will see as we go with this, I didn't show you on the other one, I use precision equipment from Harbor Freight. And I never, unless I have to, look at the digital readout. I use it as a comparator. This duck chuck, if you want to make one, 1 inch is critical, or close to 1 inch. The width needs to fit your chuck. The distance, the length can be, if you make it something easy like 6 or 8, then it's easy to find the center. So, you know, choose what you do there, and then you take it to whatever tool you use, whether it's a jointer, a table saw, a router table. I would not try to do it by hand with the router, but you create one of these. You take a rabbet on 2 sides, and that rabbet should, easiest to do is if it's a square, if it's 3/8 inch deep, 3/8 inch deep. So you just take a 3/8 by 3/8 chunk out of it. You make a bunch of these things, or at least one for this project. You make a device, and I will call this a pin because it goes in that hole. And I call this a pin because it goes in a recess on your work. I leave a space in between. This is about 1/4 inch, just to give some space in there to make sure that you've got a shoulder that fits, stops it. A little tiny crank on that chuck will do probably, so you can see that this is nice and snug. And now if you want to do something and do rotations, so in other words, make a platter with circles or little bowls all the way around the outside of it, you can do this, and then you index this face of this chuck plate. So then you just rotate your little glue block the right amount, turn it, rotate it, turn it, rotate it, turn it. You get the offset to go out to the edge of the bowl by sliding this in the chuck. You're going to do something similar again. Now we're going to make a block like we did, like I passed around. And the important thing again is you need the space that goes into that chuck and can bite down and lock tight. You can always take this thing out if you need some adjustments made and put this in a regular chuck. And if your chuck dings it up a little bit, it's really not that big a thing unless you've got a bunch of pieces protruding. If they are, just knock them off. But you put it in that chuck, tighten it down, and then turn the end of it. You would start by making that loose piece, something like this. You would start by making one, and usually when I make one, I make a bunch. It's just the waste block, and when you make these, you need at least 3/4 to an inch to make sure it's got a good grip in that piece that I handed around. Then the other end you will adjust or turn to fit whatever you're doing. This works really well for making like pendants, earrings, any kind of wooden jewelry. If you're into that or have people that are, it's very easy to do with this. But you're going to start with a chuck. This one is a Nova. You take 2 jaws out and leave 2 jaws in. Then you take your board that we've talked about making, you put it in the chuck loosely into the scroll chuck, and you tighten it gently, and you're tightening it in that rabbet. And the purpose of the rabbet is to make the overall width of the board narrower so that it fits in that 2-jawed chuck. So if you start with a 4-inch board, it may not fit. You put the rabbets in. If you put the rabbets deeper and deeper and deeper until you get it to fit, it needs to fit so that the chuck end of the chuck jaws fits tight against this part of the rabbet, and the bottom part will only bite in 2 places, but you're going to squeeze the heck out of it and it's going to bite in deep. And can you see the gouges in this one? Those are measured in some increment, and got it in. I always try to line up 1 on the jaw with the center line on my board. And the center line on the board now is actually determined not by the length, but by where the center of this hole is. And you're going to take a 2-inch, this example, and anytime I use 2-inch, if you don't like 2, use 2 1/4. If you want to use 3, if you want to use in a big chuck, if you want to use 1 1/2, whatever you want to do, just wherever I say 2-inch, you change it to your number, whatever it is. I make these things up by gluing up usually 1 1/2 by 6 tongue and groove ceiling wood. It's been real good to me, and I got lots of scraps. So anything you can find out of pine or fir or poplar, glue up so you got about a 3 by 3 block of wood, and then turn it, and this is important, 1 inch, some kind of a spacer, and it can be a 1/4 inch, it can be a 1/2 inch, and then some kind of a pin, and this is probably 3/16 inch, that goes into the recess in your bowl. This has to match the recess in your bowl. So you can turn the bowl first and match this. You can turn this and match the bowl. However you do stuff, I would turn the bowl first. Remember, this is waste block. Now, if you want to use this to make jewelry, you can just hot melt glue that to the surface of this. You can set an offset wherever you want to set it, and then by spinning this, by loosening the metal chuck a little bit, spinning this, you can put a design around the outside of your pendant. Any questions on that? Your next step is take a bowl blank, mount it on your lathe, and do your recess. This is all you can handle this all you want. It is rough cut only. I did put a embellishment in the center of the bottom because I can't get back to that easily. I may not be able to get back to that easily. But you put some kind of a recess in the bottom. This is probably, I don't know, 1/8 of an inch, maybe a little less. And you put a foot on the bottom so it's raised up off of the surface. then form the bowl. So do a little OG on it, and it can be round, can square, it can be whatever you want to do, but just form the bottom of the bowl and do it all the way up to the whatever you're calling the top edge. So you will not, this needs to be finished now, but when you get it finished, then you're ready to mount it and then turn the offset part in the top. So I'm going to try to save this and try to finish this. I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to. I kind of interchange the use of pine and poplar, because for some reason I have good luck with both of them. So I am using the pine duck's chuck, and I'm using poplar for the to fit the bowl. And then the foot that I put on here needs a groove made for the foot. So I've got the foot groove, the heavy piece that's going to drop down into this recess, and then another recess in here that that fits around the little medallion that I left in the bowl. And then this whole thing goes in there, and you can first, it doesn't really matter the order here, you can caulk this in or hot melt glue it in, and then you can offset. You've got this thing set with a 0 reference line, and you've got your chuck marked for a 0 reference line where you first put a plug in and centered it in with the point out here, and then you move the chuck some distance and you mark it, so you can move this as far off center as you want, and then you tighten the chuck down, and you barely snug it because this has to fit in yet. Once that fits in, then you can tighten it. Then you can hot melt that to the jig, and then you can hot melt that bowl on there. If you understand it, you've seen enough, then
I think we're good.